I'll just give a short biography of Nadina Christopoulou. Is the co-founder and coordinator of Melissa Network, an umbrella network of migrant women and their organizations. She studied anthropology and political science at McGill University and then pursued an M.Phil in social and political theory, PhD on social memory through Roma storytelling practices. That was your main work, and you published some of that work. Her recent research and writing focus on childhood migration and migrant women's networks. She has been involved in the development of various educational and action research projects on cultural diversity, as well as a documentary series shot in 14 countries, presenting the stories of 28 people living in each other's homelands. She's currently developing a digital photographic archive on the same subject, jointly curated with Magnum photographer Nico Economopoulos, tracing the cycles of migration that Greece has experienced in the 20th century. She's also serving as the General Secretary of the Board of Greek Council for Refugees. Some of this is a little dated, I know, Nadina, because you've been involved with Melissa pretty much, even though some of this work has continued. When we were in Athens last summer, some of the work with the Magnum photographer has continued. So some of that artistic aspect has continued, and Melissa Network, which you will talk more about, is a house with a kitchen. We had some psychological services at some point, some shelter at some point. You will tell us more about that. But essentially, I guess you moved from some maybe research-based anthropologist to a full-time activist since the refugee crisis, with some of that research and artistic work still very much part of your work, and with a more maybe European and international activism. You were telling us also about some of your visits to Cairo and to Morocco and so on. So at any rate, welcome to our seminar on migration. We're the Center of Middle Eastern and North African Studies at the University of Michigan. We're a mix of graduate and undergraduate students. It's a very small group, but very select and very attentive, and we're really looking forward to hear from you about Melissa and the work you do in the very hospitable and warm-hearted city of Athens.
Thank you so much, Khaled and Warsan, for the invitation to speak today. And many thanks to those of you who did make it and who joined us. I mean, I've been invited to your beautiful campus, and also my team has repeatedly welcomed your fellow students and teachers at Melissa Network in Athens. We think of Melissa Network as a bit of a social experiment, which is housed in a very, hospitable and warm house also in the heart of Athens. So I will, go ahead and give you like some more feedback on that. But I would like to take an extra moment and thank Professor Khalid Matawa, my dear friend Khalid, for sharing his friendship over the years together with his amazing family, and also for his beautiful poetry illuminating dark times. Khalid and I have grown up on the opposite sides of the same pond, the Mediterranean, a sea that defines us and cradles us and hurts us all at once. When we started organizing today's event, we were probably not thinking about how central, how popular or unpopular, how polarizing, how divisive, how painful and how precarious matters related to gender and migration would end up being this November. So today, as I'm going to speak, I will try to sort of reverse and question all this, and also talk about the bridges that connect us when trust is built. the immense potential of inclusion and togetherness, and also the dim hope that sprouts out of small acts of solidarity that grow bigger and stronger next to each other. In honor of, the poet organizing this, I'm going to start with just a very brief visual. It's a film that was made by some of the migrant and refugee women of Melissa Network, and it's based on a collective poem that was produced by them in a circle of women, as something that we hold quite regularly, and coordinated by Khalid's colleague and MacArthur Fellow Alicia A. Stallings, an American poet who's been working with us at Melissa Network. And as you see that, I'll just have it played so that you can get a sense of the place, the space. It's a drama exercise, so it's not like real like life as it is, but it sort of goes through a poem that was collectively composed. And then I'm going to return to your screen and tell you a bit more about the work we do. My colleague Ivy is, okay.
Say something. Do you have courage? I have courage. I have courage. I have courage. Even if you have everything in your life, without safety, it is nothing. Woman, under your tree, I found courage. I found courage. For me, home is where you can feel good, so my children are my home. Family is a magic garden where our heart is open and we are not afraid of ourselves. Dear mother, please don't trade your soul for my happiness. Mother, tell me you love me. Hope can come in many different shapes and forms. Lifting weights has nothing to do with strength. Family is supposed to empower us. Family is the people who make you feel safe. Safety lives where there is softness, warmth, tenderness, love. Safety is hugs from people you love. Safety is hugs from people you love. Love is not enough. We need power. My hope is a world without violence. The only wish that I have for the women of my homeland is freedom.
Рідна моя Україна, миру тобі якнайшвидше. Мама моя, спи спокійно, без сирен.
Freedom. Now. I heard a dream of loss and suffering, of trips without destination, without destiny. I heard a dream of care, of women giving love and food, of a womb, a hive.
آرزوی من این است تمام مردم جهان به سبب از هم بدهی و یک خلقی محبت درست کنیم.
My dream is all women free from violence, all men respectful of women. the sterile source, the earth, the shine of life is green at the edges. Freedom is not a luxury, it is a necessity for life. Home is my favorite smells. Yasmin, jasmine, Yosemite. Coffee in the morning. My kitchen and rosemary. Ilang, ilang. From the moment the sun goes down till the first beam of light. Night flower, the mother, the grandmother, the smell of my daughter's hair. This place, Melissa.
So what you saw is a drama therapy, the result of a drama therapy group, and what we call a women's circle. It's part of the multifaceted work we do at Melissa Network with migrant and refugee women, women on the move, working together with women from previous migration flows in a program that's been designed, thought out and implemented with the participation of migrant and refugee women leaders, working together with professionals, academic researchers, artists, and a wide range of people who contribute to the co-creation of this program. But let me just give you let me just give you a quick slide so that I can describe in a little more structure the kind of program that's implemented. But let me first start with going backwards and explaining to you what Melissa Network is, what it does, and what it means. So Melissa is the Greek word for honeybee. It's a metaphor for women coming here from all over the world, not necessarily directed to Greece in order to stay in Greece, but most likely passing through Greece in order to head to another destination where they will reunite with their communities or with their relatives. The name was selected by one of the co-founders who decided that the name of such an organization would have to resonate with both the local society as well as an international audience, and stand as a metaphor for women who are coming here with their stories of pain and separation, uprooting, and the loss of their homes perhaps, but also who also bring along, beside those painful stories, also stories of grit and resilience, also their talents, their ambitions, their hopes, their desires, and all the skills and talents that they can contribute to the host society. The idea behind this organization, which sort of started as an umbrella organization for the migrant and refugee women's groups that were active in Greece about a decade ago, was to actually create a platform where women of diverse origins could join forces, connect with one another, learn from one another, share stories of resilience, share their triumphs, share their defeats as well, but also find solutions, common solutions to common problems. The lack of spaces for women's activism, the lack of opportunities to coexist and raise their voices and validate their experience was quite overbearing back then. Even the grassroots activism at that period was quite male dominated. So in that light, there was a huge desire and will by migrant women's groups to actually form those alliances and to work together. My involvement in that, and I'll just sort of try to place myself in this, is that as a postdoctoral researcher, I happen to be working with about 24 different migrant and refugee women's groups and came to admire the immense dedication, the commitment, and the resourcefulness of women who were working with very limited means and resources. In fact, and this is something that actually came to my mind as I was in the previous full-day panel talking about the presence of women in foreign policy and the role of civil society in designing and implementing, crisis responses, was that that when I started working in this field, the first sort of feedback I got was that what you encounter when you are dealing with women's migration is silence. The lack of voices, this sort of silenced voices. It was not at all my experience when I actually did enter this field, having sort of worked with diaspora narratives for a long time, prior to that. And what in fact I felt I was surrounded by was, very loud, very strong voices. So, I mean, someone had used the expression deafening silences, and sort of my response to that was that it was all, it was deafening, but it was definitely not silences. And so the direction of my work was to sort of showcase how agency can exist even among those with the fewest resources, and that impact can be made even by those whose voices and needs are least taken into account. So talking about, women, migrant women, refugee women, they were the women whose views and voices may have been decentralized, marginalized, or even occasionally silenced, but who were really struggling to play a role, a central role in the making of their own lives. And so in working with all those 24 different nationalities, 24 different groups of women, there was immense potential in terms of what could be achieved if they all joined forces and worked together. So when Melissa was created back in 2014, a decade ago, it was actually talking about women and migration, very much like today and very much like in the context of, your own country. It was very much out of fashion. The problems were so, it was tremendously unpopular as a subject. Everybody, nobody was interested in that. Greece was going through a major economic crisis. But at the same time, there was another, looming crisis, a major refugee crisis that was about to, erupt right out of the war in Syria. And at the same time as the organization was founded with an agenda of connecting women who were migrants, women who had made Greece their home in one way or another, around the same period, in the sort of same month, basically, that Melissa Network was opened with this agenda of connecting women, raising their voices, promoting self-advocacy and capacity building for themselves. A massive number of a predominantly female migration flow basically came to our doorstep. So it was an imperative to, it seemed like an imperative to really engage with this population and to actually go beyond the restraints of emergency aid and support. I mean, that was a time of great solidarity. Athenians back then were, although we experienced the rise of the ultra-right for a period, as we are experiencing it now again, unfortunately, Athenians were exhibited a huge solidarity spirit, so did the people on the islands. And together, and so did all the migrant and refugee women participants of our organization. However, the pivotal moment, and I think the identity formation moment of this organization, which was somehow envisioned as an open beehive, following upon the sort of name metaphor, its title metaphor, was envisioned as an open beehive of, creativity and creative coexistence and creative exchange, was to actually try and go beyond mere aid, to shift the focus from aid to agency, to not engage in the rhetoric that was reiterated by the media at the time and by even the international organizations portraying women as needy, victims in discourse, and really highlighting vulnerability and even creating a context where, different types of vulnerabilities had to, be in some sort of competition with each other, and tried to focus on potential, on the stories behind all those women, tried to rehumanize, in a sense, this dehumanizing journey, and tried to create a kind of bridge where women on the move would find like the first solid soil, the first solid sort of ground underneath their feet to catch their breath, reclaim threads of their identity, and try to sort of put together, who they were, and also try to reimagine, to imagine, if possible, where they wanted to get. And at the time, the decision that was made in the context of this organization was to come up with, to design and to try and implement an integration pathway for women on the move, working together hand in hand with women, migrants, and refugees from previous migration flows, to learn from one another, to share their experiences, and to try and somehow create tools of integration that could be used anywhere, that could be mobile and flexible, adaptable, that could be taken wherever they needed to go, and to really focus on their life strategies, as opposed, to simply, delivering the aid that was being provided. And in that context, and maybe we can share another slide, we came up with a program that was very much community-based. It was based on the participation of the migrant and refugee women leaders, as well as to women women from those communities who, against the stereotype of the low-skilled laborers, domestic laborers and all that, were actually experts in their own communities. So together with a lot of professional experts and academics, we came up with a program that comprehensively addressed the needs as well as the desires of the women, on the move at that time. So it's a program that's, Khalid mentioned certain aspects of that. It's a program that combines literacy with mental health support, because the one cannot work without the other, and because mental health support was critical especially for women running away from, wars, and with a sort of component of art and creativity added to that, because art is what opens doors where language or trauma may, shrink spaces and close doors. And that was also complemented by information, because information is power, by skills, because, reskilling and really working on their existing skills was something that was going to be an empowering experience for them in order to claim their space in the new society, together with a component on media and advocacy, because what we really wanted was them to tell their stories instead of others telling their stories on their behalf, to an additional sort of component combining self-care, something which, you know, women tend to not to prioritize, with community engagement. And by community engagement, we meant, this is a slightly more detailed sort of outline of the program, of our integration pathway. And by community engagement, I think we'll just, I just showed it to you just to give you, to get a sense of structure, but I don't want you to, you know, sort of be looking at that only. That's only one part of our work, is the sort of integration component that that we provide together with the rest of our team. However,
Nadina, can you send us these, please?
yeah, of course, we'll send you
Thank you.
everything. We'll send you everything as of course in the end. But
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to sort of also mention was that the community engagement idea was something proposed by the, together with all the rest, by the migrant and refugee women leaders, as an opportunity to step out of this notion of, you know, a refugee or an asylum seeker, and to really showcase, to really sort of highlight the importance of giving back to the community. So for us, it ended up becoming the key moment of integration, the decisive moment of integration, which was the moment that somebody shifted from being a passive recipient of aid to a proactive agent of change, and somebody who could contribute and support others with less. And I think that in that context, the phrase that was very much a driving force for us, I will quote one of my closest colleagues and you know, a role model for this organization, Debbie Carlos Valencia, a Filipino social worker who's been an activist in the international Filipino diaspora for more than 35 years. Her, you know, motto was that you give not because you have more, but because you know what it is not to have anything. And I think that became a sort of driving force around the, you know, crafting, the honing of the identity of this place, whereby women who had entered, you know, immediately, like in what we call the after the boat stage, you know, women who had sort of exited the boats, that Khalid very well knows the you know, the situation on the islands, made it to the mainland, entered our space, sort of, you know, gray in the face, with unsmiling faces, unable to articulate much. And then soon after that, working closely with, you know, women leaders and activists from all over the world, were basically able not only to start, you know, finding their own sources of strength and standing on their feet, but also contributing and supporting the ones who followed and who, you know, who came after them. So in all this context and throughout this decade of developing this kind of program, as well as in the previous research that I've been involved in, what we've seen is that instead of, you know, silences of, you know, women of migrant or refugee backgrounds, we have like two things that are in common. On the one hand, you have an open, what we call an open cycle of precarity. In our work at Melissa, we receive about 50 different nationalities of women coming from all over the world, either from blazing war zones or from protracted wars that may rage for decades, or from those, you know, other kinds of wars that are, you know, silent wars, wars of oppression, of lack of access to justice and equality, and wars where persecution, women may have felt persecution just, you know, on the basis of their gender. What has been the common line in all that is that all those women have experienced an open cycle of precarity, starting in the country of origin, continuing along the journey, and sometimes culminating upon reaching a country that they may have considered to be safe. I mean, Greece is a European country. It's a country where they have all entered, not necessarily with the intention of staying, but certainly with the hope that they would somehow be granted more rights than what they had in their previous situation. what we have seen in all those cases is, women working, making something out of almost nothing, working as multipliers in their day-to-day lives, in the camps where they reside, in the state-assisted accommodation that they are temporarily, given sometimes and are no longer given. They work with conflict. They work as peacemakers. They resolve conflict. They are the ones who are actually, preventing sometimes radicalization in their own communities. They're integrators. They're very, active in promoting the integration prospects of their children primarily, but also of their wider community. They're multipliers, multitaskers, and they are also the ones who are weaving solidarity and building community and building social cohesion. So for us, it was very important to shift the narrative from what I said before, aid to agency, and also to promote not just the success stories, but the role models of women who struggled and managed to achieve all that against all odds. So the program I showed you is just one part of the work we do. It's a program that's been running uninterruptedly for almost a decade now. It started in 2016, so it's like 8 solid years. And it combines, all these different fields that I showed you. We work with educators, psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists, social workers, but also cultural mediators, a lot of social scientists, but also a lot of cultural mediators and educators that come from the different communities and that act as the bridges with the sort of the participants. We try to use the word participants instead of the word beneficiaries because, for many reasons, including the fact that, we're also, all of us are benefiting from this mutual interaction, and it's a bit of a demeaning sort of term. Nobody wants to see themselves as beneficiaries, and nobody wants to identify as refugees for more than like the first brief period. So in a way, I mean, this is the solid ongoing program, but we also on a daily basis we receive people who also come to submit their cases and to seek support or information. We have a strand that's dedicated to sexual and gender-based violence because of the very, very high rates of that we encounter. And we also have 2 more strands that are sort of developing on the side in relation to the research that we conduct. And the one is our networking around the Mediterranean and in the Global South in the context of grassroots organizations working on women's rights, as well as a special focus that we are having on communities in crisis. And I don't want to take up a lot of the time and go into a lot of examples, but what I would like to just briefly sort of mention is that, as you can imagine, over a decade, you have a shift in the population flows, and sometimes, there's a focus on certain communities in crisis that are actually, I mean, Greece is a great testing ground because it's like everybody, it stands, I mean, geographically in the middle of, Europe, Asia, and Africa. So whatever crisis is looming in the vicinity, in the MENA region and beyond, or, northwards or eastwards or southwards, it's sort of entering mainly through Greece. What I would like, however, to briefly sort of touch upon is our experience in 1 or 2 communities in crisis, as we call them, the one related to Afghanistan and the subsequent one related to Ukraine, in the aftermath of the political turmoil in the first case and the war in the second case. And just briefly, in order to demonstrate how through through this focus, and through this targeted work on communities in crisis, provided that there is support and that there is access and that there is a context within which different issues can be negotiated, a lot can happen if there is this kind of political will. So I will just briefly mention our experience in the aftermath of the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, where ourselves, Melissa Network, was very involved in the process of evacuating human rights defenders, women human rights defenders from Afghanistan, with the support of, international organizations, international feminist networks, funding, sometimes governmental, sometimes non-governmental, and a situation where a lot of, worldwide actors overnight got involved in the support and rescue operations of women at risk in Afghanistan. In our experience, and I don't know if you recall that period, that was about 3.5 years ago, or a bit less than that, almost overnight, there was a sort of huge international mobilization to rescue women whose names had appeared on Taliban death lists, and to actually secure their onward movement after the withdrawal of US troops, to safely evacuate them, to third countries, and to eventually shift them to North America or wherever they could go. And in that context, I don't know how many of you may remember that what dominated the media was a sort where all these rescue stories, rescue operations, whereby some, Western philanthropists sort of intervened, rescued, those women who were somehow portrayed as damsels in distress. And that was that, the sort of media narrative around that subject was somehow exhausted in the first few weeks in stories like that kind of left out the immense political activism, the commitment of all those women, the risks that they faced in order to make a political career in such against such adversity, and in such a context, and in that period, we ended up having, we were also involved in that, and ended up having a very substantial number of Afghan women human rights defenders, journalists, activists, judges, a lot of different, professional sort of categories, including a very substantial number of Afghan women politicians. Now, what happened, and I would like to highlight that because I think it's a very telling example, is that when we realized that we had about 1/3 of the female representation into the Afghan parliament sitting here being here in Greece, what we started to do as an organization, as a women's organization, was to hold networking meetings, meetings connecting them, because they arrived with different flights, different efforts, they lived in different places. And we felt that our work was not to just, highlight how important it is to support the privileged few, but how important it is to somehow, and that's the way that we sort of perceived our involvement in it, was how important it was to rescue a burning beehive, of creative, political, of women who had this immense political activism in their backgrounds, to rescue them from a blazing forest and to sort of ensure that they would be within a context that would be safe for them, in order to pick up the threads of their political activism, what made them, what actually, put their name on those death lists. So in our mind, and, given that Melissa is an organization that's made up of women with a huge community activism background, the sort of work that we pursued together with a lot of legal, experts, and human rights activists was to support them in creating a network which was announced, was actually created here in Greece and announced and launched at the first parliament of Greece after independence, called the Afghan Women Leaders and Parliamentarians Network. The reason it was so important for us to get involved in supporting this initiative was because we wanted to prevent the kind of atomization and fragmentation that diaspora entails. And we thought that once you have this tremendous potential, you have these resources of women who may have been deprived of everything because, of course, they lost their power, they lost, their positions, they lost, even their families. But they did maintain, their dedication, their commitment to their causes. So by just letting them sort of sink into this, waiting mode until, the US or Canada would pick them up and resettle them, we felt that it was imperative to actually support them in creating an independent network that could then, as it did, pursue its activism at the highest echelons of power. They were represented at the European Parliament, the European External Action Service, the UN, and eventually relaunched their network in Canada under the auspices of Prime Minister Trudeau himself, and with like a very high support very solid support from the current Canadian government. We don't know what's going to happen when that government also changes. That for us was a very critical moment where we saw how when, there is a political will, there is always a way. And when, even among, those dispossessed or deprived of resources, when the proper investment is made, then, wonders can happen. And I'm saying that usually when we refer to that experience, we are always taking, a huge pride in the outcomes of that work and also in the aftermath. Because if you recall, approximately 6 months after the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, another crisis exploded much closer to Europe in, the war, I'm talking about the war in Ukraine. And at that point, we started on the basis of our experience with migrant and refugee women leaders previously, but also with the Afghan leaders just within that period. We supported the Ukrainian community in self-organizing and creating an alternative model to, aid and emergency support the way that would have been otherwise. I won't go into detail with that because that's a different story, but I would like to contrast this with how painful it is for all of us today to see that in lack of political will, we are not able to receive, and we're not yet receiving people from Palestine, people from Lebanon, even people from Sudan, because our, politics in Europe and beyond have actually deterred and impeded this kind of movement. So in lack of a political will, no matter how determined civil society is, there are obstacles that are insurmountable. We do still receive a lot of secondary flows from Palestine, especially from Palestinians who had left Gaza due to rising settlers' violence and had moved to Turkey or to, to sort of nearby areas, and then moved over to Greece. And we are sort of working on building like a contingency plan in case these things change. But, our experience in this context is hugely different from the story I just sort of narrated to you. I think I would like to, sort of, as it's just a few of you, maybe we could somehow engage in a more open discussion. What I would like to sort of, conclude with, and the reason I talked about, that and tried to give these examples is that although, I mean, even in the cases where people may have lost everything, what we see in our experience, in our day-to-day experience working with really a vast number of different communities and some of them in experiencing crisis, people still can manage to make something out of nothing, to invent resources, to invent hope even when, hope is lost, and to also trace, a path in the dark even when, all light is gone. And in that sense, I think that if they can do it, we can also do it. We can find the hope. I feel I need to say a word of consolation to people in the US these days. We all, find the hope. We need to pull ourselves together somehow, and try and work harder on building bridges, building beehives, and building our togetherness on stronger foundations, and being inspired by all the work that's done by people who have really lost everything and trying to pull through the dark times ahead.
Thank you, Nadina. Thank you so much. Okay. Any comments or questions for Nadina? Andrew? I think we'll switch on the lights maybe so she can see us.
I can see.
Okay.
I had a question, I guess, about language and how we talk about things, because it's one of those that everything kind of reinforces in a cycle. And when you end up in a situation where like our current language is very passive, whether it's refugee or, one who is seeking asylum for that, it tends to be more of a recipient in this case. And I know especially coming into the current era that we're in, there's a lot of especially pushback on Europe and the US there's negative associations of that. Do we have a need to try and change like how we talk about, whether it's within these communities or whether it's outside of, to try and better fit more of a kind of an active role rather than a more passive, in just kind of trying to find that hope, that step forward, rather than just the limbo waiting, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think language is everything. I mean, the way we term, the terms we use, the connotations, the passivity, the sort of, this element of the passive recipient of aid, or the sort of consumer of resources. I think this is what shapes our minds. And I think that, frankly, this is what in the long term is not helping the sort of causes that, and I think we've all been having these discussions in the context of your recent elections, but also we are having these discussions in terms of, the predominant sort of the narratives that have prevailed even in Europe with the rise of the ultra-right. And to be honest, I think we are making a grave mistake in reiterating these passive narratives, because what they achieve in the long term is to somehow consolidate an image of, the other, the migrant, the refugee, the asylum seeker, as a parasite in our communities. So if we don't sort of question our terminology, we're not going to undermine those stereotypes that have been so carefully crafted and cultivated by masterful, populism is a powerful discourse. It's very simple, it's linear, it's straightforward. When we try to be nuanced, as we do, we often do, we sort of miss the opportunity of really somehow reversing, the message. And what we fail to say is that our societies need to need migrants to even, I'm not thinking in these terms, but if you want to make like a popular argument, you have to really make people understand that, Europe needs to import 20 million workers within the next decade or 2 decades in order to sustain its social security system or its workforce. I mean, even Greece, which is a tiny country, it does need working hands in order to sustain its tourism industry. But you know, when we just sort of ride a rights discourse. A rights discourse is sometimes, you know, what it implies is that there's a set of rights that sort of in the hands of somebody, and there we are, you know, the sort of self-selected kind of audiences of righteous, whatever, self-righteous do-gooders, pointing to, you know, the rights that we should allocate, that should be allocated to people. And all this leads to alienation, you know, so people do not sympathize, do not empathize, they do not necessarily understand that the challenges are there's a common denominator of challenges that's there, and that should be, you know, bonding us together instead of driving us apart. I think this immense polarization that we experience in our societies, let alone, you know, all the sort of political sort of choices that have been made. You referred to the pushbacks. I referred earlier to, you know, the silence, perhaps, that, you know, Europe has been somehow expressing towards Gaza, or I think the terminology is vital, and we should indeed try to find, you know, better, more, you know, like wider terms that can contain all that. And thanks for the question. I think it's actually, it's an immense challenge, and I think that it's a huge failure on the part of you know, whoever wants to be within a kind of you know, works on the principles of democracy and equity and justice, to not be able to address that.
I just wanted to say thank you again for that really detailed and inspiring talk that you gave. I kind of wanted to ask about your opinion on some of the political trends that we're seeing in Greece. As you mentioned, there are a lot of political obstacles in receiving migrants from Palestine and Lebanon. And I know that there's just a lot of scrutiny on arrivals coming from Greece's eastern islands. With this increased security presence on these eastern islands, do you anticipate an influx in arrivals from alternate migration routes, such as southern islands? And I wanted to get your take on maybe a prediction for the future of arrivals in Greece.
Yeah, I mean, we are all expecting a rise, except from, you know, actually a week ago, we requested the kind of contingency meeting from the UNHCR. The government was supposed to be present. I mean, we cannot be caught in the same situation that we were 10 years ago in the context of the Syrian war, because by now we know the war has been raging for you know, quite a while, and there's also Sudan. There's so many crises around us. Unfortunately, I mean, you mentioned the pushbacks, and you mentioned the securitization along, you know, the eastern islands. Whenever, I mean, Greece is a country that has a very porous border. It's not possible to, you know, no matter how many fences you raise, it's just not possible to deter the majority of the flows. People will find a way to cross, or they will try to find a way. What we have seen over the past couple of years, and as security is sort of heightened along the eastern islands, we see people taking the much riskier routes of, you know, the southern Mediterranean, crossing through Egypt and Libya. I mean, you saw, I don't know how many of you saw it, but it was, there was a massive shipwreck just off the coast of Pylos in the south South Peloponnese, which is the deepest, the deepest sort of point in the Mediterranean. It's much deeper than the Titanic, I think I read somewhere. So, seeing people opting for those much riskier routes is something that should alarm us. So we do, I believe we are going to face increased flows. I believe we're still not prepared. I mean, the state preparedness, I think, is just, not there. The argument that we have seen we have heard, circulating is that nothing is going to happen. The Lebanese are not going to leave. Palestinians, well, maybe towards Syria, maybe Egypt, but not necessarily here. I think there's an expectation of rising flows towards Cyprus, but really, nobody's going to stay in Cyprus. People will try to enter through through mainland Greece. And then Sudan, of course, again, is deterred by Egypt. But I don't think that this is going to be the case. I think we're already seeing increased numbers, not hugely, but we do already see a lot of people on the islands. The islands of Rhodes has already quite a large number of people just living in the streets. And I think that our current government's policy is to, completely evade the issue and not, what I heard and I found shocking was that although they gave an order for doubling the capacity in the island camps. So they gave a contract to a construction company. I'm sorry, I've been operating under Chatham House rules all day, so I'm going to be very open about this. From the previous meeting, they gave a contract to a construction company to double the number of places and camps, but they are still only going to open 3,000 more. So it makes no sense. So I think, in a way they are preparing, but we just don't know when this is going to happen and how. And in any case, our government has worked very skillfully in terms of isolating civil society from camps. All the camps have been decentralized and out of Athens. This was the sort of concept of the previous mayor of Athens, also to turn it into a tourist destination that would be refugee-free. So this has resulted in camps being, quite isolated from one another and far away from all the infrastructure that they can benefit from. What, however, we have seen with the Ukrainian diaspora, and there again, we're talking about the Christian white population, which massively entered Europe through open doors, was that the numbers there were not even observed, were not even felt. And part of that is because there has been a lot of active engagement on behalf of the Ukrainian community. And in our case, I can say that because all the diaspora organizations were women-led. We had been working very closely with them. And together with, immediately after the community organizing of the Afghans, we saw the self-organizing of the women-led Ukrainian, diaspora organizations. They actually achieved a shift in, the architecture of aid in Athens. They created right next to us, and, with our support and the support of a lot of organizations, and kind of info hub where people would turn to their own community first and then be sort of delegated to different places and services. And that worked really well. But at the same time, everybody, people were much more sort of open and welcoming towards the Ukrainian population throughout Europe. So Europe absorbed, just to compare the numbers, there was about 1 million refugees fleeing Syria but also secondary flows from Afghanistan and other places that had been trapped in camps, mainly in Turkey, that entered Europe in the period 2015, 2016. There were 8 million that entered Europe from Ukraine within the last 3 years. There's a disproportionate sort of representation of those two different flows that dominated the media. The first one was termed the refugee crisis. The second one was not.
And were the Ukrainian sort of networking, was that useful to the other migrants? Were they able to help other migrants, or was it exclusive for the Ukrainians?
I mean, in our line of work, Khalid, we do try to, provide those sort of joint efforts and to bring people together. We think it's vital that the one community learns from the other. We do perceive it as stepping stones. So we tried to use this, best practice, let's say. I mean, it was showcased around Europe as a best practice in terms of community involvement and community activism. And we tried to see both of those cases, both the Afghan and especially the Ukrainian, as two opportunities, like especially the Ukrainian as an opportunity to see how, when there's a will, there is a way to actually, receive people and integrate them as fast and as efficiently as possible. I'm not sure that this is going to be the case if the influx starts, if there's a sort of increase in the number of people arriving from Lebanon and Palestine and Sudan.
We have a question. This is maybe for a longer term question, and particularly for, you mentioned the women coming from Afghanistan who are fleeing repressive situations with the Taliban. So thank you for sharing your work of your transformative organization. I do have a question. There tends to be a perception that the West is a much more progressive space for women. However, as a child myself of immigrant parents and living among other immigrant communities, it is surprising how my home country of Canada sometimes reproduces extremely repressive immigrant communities that are not much more safe or Asian-driven for women. How does your organization insulate women who are transitioning or on to Western nations where their communities may in fact offer a model of living similar to the spaces they fled from in the first place?
So I'm afraid I cannot give
Yeah.
a positive, like an answer that is positive to that. In fact, there are times, and I have to be very frank with this, that I think that through our work, we may actually have the opposite than the desired effect. I think that when, sometimes, as the person posing the question mentioned, sometimes people tend to move towards their communities in different places for many positive reasons. For example, the fact that they can reproduce social networks, whatever's been broken and interrupted and fragmented in the aftermath of whatever wars or persecution they've suffered. But at the same time, this may also reproduce and reiterate very conservative contexts and very oppressive practices, as well as a heightened risk. And, this is one of the sort of reminders that we have, the issues that we have to keep reminding ourselves every day. We work a lot on women's rights. We inform women about, their rights and about the access they have in order to claim those rights. However, we work exclusively with women and girls. We do not work with men. We do not work. We work sometimes with a wider family, but not as much as we should or as we wish we could, for lack of, you know, resources, for lack of a lot of different things. And you know, quite frankly, when you don't work in a horizontal way, when, you know, you just equip women with the language and the practice of, you know, their rights that they can claim, they leave our beautiful, safe sanctuary space here and head back to a household, perhaps, or a community that continues to be oppressive and continues to be, you know, sort of excluding towards them. And in those cases, you know, the risk is very high. I have to admit that there's been a case with one of our like very first participants. It's one of the, I mean, I mentioned briefly before that we work a lot with gender-based violence. And one of the things that we also unfortunately work on is femicides. We experience a very high number of femicides in Europe, as well as, you know, Turkey and surrounding areas. And some of those happen within the highly unmonitored spaces or communities of migrants or refugees, even within Europe. So in a sense, it's a bit of a luxury to talk about, you know, women's rights and access to justice and all that, without being able to equip people to you know, offer like a real sense of safety. So we've also experienced our share of that. One of our very first participants was murdered by her partner in Germany. And in fact, going through the sort of trial, you know, like documents, because he was taken to court afterwards and he was sentenced to 6 years for murdering her in front of her 2 kids. The language used, and, you know, we always go back to language, the language used was that she was the one who brought in the kitchen knife into the bedroom. And I have to tell you that I've had many sleepless nights after that, because I remember the phrases that this woman used very often whenever she was preparing to go back home. She was kind of rehearsing, you know, the different phrases that she sort of picked up from all the info sessions, you know, from all the sessions with the human rights lawyers, with the women activists and all that. And I sort of fear, you know, in my worst nightmares, that it wasn't just the kitchen knife that led to the crime, but it was also the language that we taught her without being able to safeguard, like, or to control somehow the environment around her. So in that sense, it's really, you know, it's really like swimming in the dark in a vast ocean. You don't know what you're going to come across, but, you know, you still have to keep trying.
I mean, I would hate to add this phrase, but there is a crisis of meaning and values, and I mean, even say a sense of emasculation that occurs as part of exile and migration, and that brings about domestic violence, or increases, potentially increases that you could see elements of that happening. So unemployment, part of it, stress, sense of devaluation as well. These are not excuses, but part of the reality. And also, in my other courses, Palestinian American literature, we see just the mention of increased domestic violence as part of the immigrant experience. It just so happens that is, I don't know if it's more visible or just more part of the experience as part of the immigrant existence. So that seems to be a greater stress, a greater sense of self-worth within the hierarchy of the the space of migration. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers the guest's question to some extent. Any other questions from our group? No, any Zoom questions? All right. And Nadina, how long are folks staying in Greece? Are they moving on? Is Greece helping people stay that are what is Greece's policy about some of the migrants who've come and stayed?
Yeah, Greece has, I mean, on paper, sort of integration strategy, which has never
Mhm.
been, properly implemented. Having said that, I mean, in countries like Greece, or maybe in some countries around the Mediterranean, and Khalid, you can perhaps, I mean, you will see what I'm trying to say. Integration, like it happens if you don't create obstacles to it. So it's the kind, society is open. I mean, it has a lot of, vices, and there is a rise in, racism and xenophobia, but at the same time, people are, quite open, extroverted, and quite welcoming. I mean, Greece is also a country that has a past of, as a sending country. There's no Greek family that does not have a migration story in its sort of memory chest. So it's if you don't, like, I believe that if you don't create obstacles to integration in one way or another, some sort of integration is going to happen. However, the state is not really taking substantial measures for it to happen properly and to happen, in a sort of even way. And I think what we've seen with the current right-wing government is a huge investment in deterrent policies. So the situation has been worsening year after year. There is actually not even, proper accommodation offered even to asylum seekers. It's just camps by now. I mean, we've been trying to make a contingency plan about people coming from, like some special, very vulnerable categories of people in case, they sort of make it to Greece. The situation is quite appalling. It's just, there is no support for anything involving independent accommodation beyond the camps, except from a very small amount that's given after asylum is recognized. So it's camps until you get asylum, and then you get a small sum of money, which is a few thousand euros, like very few, and which is money that can contribute to your rent eventually, but not enough planning for, for language courses, and not enough not enough of a comprehensive planning of integration. So this is something that, Greece is deliberately not investing in because it doesn't want it to be perceived as a pull factor.
Well, the other thing is not far from Melissa in this cafes and restaurants and so on. We used to see these young Egyptian guys who made it there, and some of them are hanging out at the cafes. And but then if you go to other places, some of them are working maybe illegally. Some people are actually contributing to the economy, and I'm sure in some of these small businesses, the Greek businesses need them. So clearly, not everybody is in the system and are not getting money from the Greek government, are not even depending on it. And I'm sure that some Greek businesses need these people to be working and to be getting paid under the table, but they're not that invisible. So what is happening regarding that, so-called black market economy, which is kind of really out in the open? I mean, and that has to be not such a small portion of the real life economy of Greece now.
Yeah, and it also spans over like a range of activities. I mean, ranging from what you described, small businesses that are owned, like that have a sort of ethnic characteristics, but also, farming, agriculture. There's a huge lack of workers, working hands, because Greeks, even, I mean, now unemployment rates are lower, but even when they were very high, they refused, like there were unemployment figures up to 27%, and still Greeks would refuse to go pick peaches, for example. So there is a huge need. I mean, also in the tourism industry, there has been a huge need in, having people to work there. That's actually the sort of field that absorbed the majority of Ukrainians, from what I understand. What the current government is doing is pursuing some bilateral agreements so as to keep it regulated and monitored. So Egypt is one. I think Bangladesh is another, because we need seasonal workers to pick fruit so that our agriculture doesn't, sink. And I think that this is also, I mean, the problem, I mean, that I personally have when I look at all those policies, because, whatever, I mean, it's good that there are some policies at least, is that they're all geared towards what the labor market needs. And this is kind of dehumanizing, because these people do need maybe their families, they need to ensure, like, they can't be coming year after year from Egypt or from Bangladesh or something. Anyway, one of the positive measures, however, is that recently there's been an effort to regularize some of the people who are here, in order to sort of at least, monitor the situation and to ensure that there are some workers, because beyond that, many small Greek businesses or medium-sized Greek businesses need to go abroad to countries like Bulgaria or Albania, or other places with lower taxes, and also, an abundance of working hands. So in search of cheaper labor. So it's very, otherwise they're doomed to fail. So there are some positive motions, but they're not accompanied by the appropriate discourse. So they're kind of portrayed under the, covered under the guise of, labor market needs and all that. Having said that, now that you mentioned Egypt, we do see a rising number of Egyptians. Actually, it's one of the migratory flows that are on the rise. I was looking at the most recent numbers, and this is one of the flows that we also observe here at Melissa a lot. And you probably recall that when you were here over the summer, we do already employ a few Egyptians here. We see an increase in the flows, especially, of young women. So there is like a heightened risk there as well. It's not a community in crisis, but still the numbers are much higher than we've seen before.
And what about Crete, which is also safer? It's a big island, and it's interesting that that big boat that sank, they were reaching out for Italy or maybe Greece, but Crete is right there, and it's only a few hours from some of those ports in Libya that have been shipping off people from Bangladesh and Egypt. And I've been reading about boats landing in Crete. Is that becoming an area of receiving migrants, and what is happening there?
Yes, the south of Crete, indeed. What we see, however, is that they're almost immediately transferred to the mainland, to remote camps, and sort of taken to different places. There's like the islands are actually no longer willing to, to keep the numbers of arrivals there. So what ends up happening is that all those people are kind of reallocated to different camps in the mainland. That's what I've heard of the recent arrivals to Crete. But again, we're talking about riskier routes. I mean, the one in Lesbos, on the eastern islands, they're much sort of the much closer distances.
Mm.
The southern routes are far worse.
Mm. Mm.
And it's not just the routes, it's also the boats, you know, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the fishing boats that are used. So it's like all the boats that have been taken out of, you know, their fishing career and are now having their like last chapter crossing the Mediterranean with a human cargo.
All right. Well, if you don't have any questions, is that it? Okay. Well, I hope some of these people will be reaching out to you and joining you. It's a great, great place, everyone. Great work. It's you go there and you don't have to. You basically you'll just be welcomed for a few days, and then you will get to do some work. The first thing you will feel is hospitality, and then you will be doing work. It's the opposite of torturous internship. It's always the welcome, and then the work comes in. Great welcoming atmosphere at Melissa. It's been a great atmosphere and hospitality and generosity and friendship and community in its deepest and most profound way. So thank you, Nadina, for all your work and for coming with us so late in the day. And we appreciate you so much. And also your colleagues who are staying with you tonight to bring you over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ivy, say hi to Ivy.
Please, yeah.
Hi, Ivy. Thank you so much.
We thank you.
Yeah.
We thank you for this. And, you know,
Okay.
apologies, we are sort of
No, you're good. You're good.
dwindling, you know, like kind of
Yeah. Okay.
fading out.
Okay. Selma says hi. She's very envious of me talking to you today.
Lots of love to our best volunteer ever.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Nadina.
Thank you so much. Have a
Bye-bye.
good day, all of you, and a great
Bye-bye.
week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.